Hey there, this is Erica from Ever Educating, and this channel is teaching tips, tools, ideas, and resources for college instructors or high school teachers. And specifically today, I'm talking about teaching MLA, right? So if you are someone who teaches, obviously literature or writing courses, this would really apply to you. But in any field, if you're teaching your students how to use the MLA citation style, then this is my approach that I take that you might find useful. So to begin, my go-to resource is Purdue Owl when I'm teaching MLA. They have guides for obviously APA and Chicago and other styles, but it's a great guide, right? It has a lot of detail in one-stop shop. So I do always have this website linked on my Canvas page for my students, and I use it when I'm teaching them how to use the citation style. That's my first tip, is introduce your students to this particular website and tell them, hey, here's where you go for a really comprehensive guide to how to create tons of MLA citations for whatever it is you're turning in for my class. Now, because it's so comprehensive, right, it's a huge website, tons of links, tons of pages, tons of examples, I also create a guide, like a short guide for my students for MLA. So for example, in the current course I'm teaching, it's a literature and writing course, and so we start with poetry and we do fairy tales, short stories, novels, and so on. And so what I've done is I've created a short PDF, a Google Drive doc, and I basically say, okay, here's an example of doing a poem that we found online, doing a fairy tale that we found online, doing a short story that's a PDF from an anthology, doing an academic article, doing an academic book, right? And so I give them an example of each of the main types of citations they'll probably be creating. Websites are a huge one too, right? So I do show that as well. And so I have, here's the short version. You might be using these citations. Here's the information. So last name, comma, first name, period, in italics, and so on and so forth. I actually describe that. And then I have an example underneath. That's actually like an example website or an example book, okay? And it's in hanging indent, they're in alphabetical order, right? All that jazz. So I show them basically an example Works Cited page that includes the main types of citations that my students might be using. So I say, here's this guide. But if you're using things that are unusual, right? If you're using, a podcast or a tweet or a video or whatever, again, here's that link to Purdue Owl. You'll find that on there. So this is another way that I recommend kind of getting them started on learning about MLA. Now, once you introduce them to these concepts, my recommendation is creating citations as a short and small participation activity. So in my case, when my students had to do their first paper, one of their homework assignments was find the 2 academic sources that you're going to be using for this paper, create the MLA citations for them, that's going to be in the Works Cited, and post it to this discussion forum. You can get a point just for having them on there. Make sure you're formatting them properly, right, in MLA. And so they had just a really quick activity using things that they will be using in their paper. And so I can see it and say, yeah, great job, you're good. Or I can say, hey, this is APA, this is not MLA, make sure you revise that before you turn this paper, right? Or, hey, this is MLA, but the title of the journal should be italicized. You don't have the page number, right? These things are missing. Go ahead and revise them. And so it doesn't take too much time on your hands to just say, yes, it's right, this is APA, go look at MLA. Or say, hey, you have the information, but it's not formatted properly. Go again to this guide, go again to Purdue Owl, and make sure you revise it before the paper. Here's one hint, this should be italicized, right? Or here's one hint, this needs page numbers, and so on. So I recommend this kind of small activity to help make sure that they're on the right path before the paper is actually submitted. Something to consider as well, if a lot of them do it improperly, where they're not formatting it correctly, you might create some kind of Kahoot game to give them as well for participation. And so you can have in the Kahoot, a question, all right, this is the name of the book, how should it look? And you can say it should look italicized, it should be in quotation marks, it should be shortened, it should be whatever. And get a sense of, okay, yes, the correct answer is A, it should be italicized. Next question, are the page numbers needed? Which is the format, if so? And you have different formats. Right? And so actually have them, study this formatting, because obviously there's a big issue here, and I'm gonna give you a little Kahoot quiz, right, to see how you can do, right? You can get points, you can get extra credit, however you wanna do that, right? But give them a sense of maybe gamifying, learning about these formats, or at least having an activity that shows them, hey, have you been ignoring these important elements of MLA? If you have, make sure you check before this paper is due, right? There's a reason I'm asking about italicizing words, about doing quotation marks, about page numbers, about if a URL is needed, what does access by mean, right? And so you have this element of making some kind of game or activity to do in class as well if you see a lot of them doing it incorrectly. And then of course, that's all for like the works cited, right? So you have, okay, hanging indent, alphabetical order, double space, we've talked about the formatting and all of that, but then obviously there's internal, right? In-text citations as well. And so in my guide, I do have a list where I say, okay, is there one author? These are your options. You can have the author's name in the sentence or in the parentheses. You know, here's an example of direct quoting versus paraphrasing with this option. Are there more than 2 authors? Okay, you use this little et al term, right? And so I have a list there of the basics. You know, is there no author? You put a shortened version of the article name. And so I have that in my guide as well, not just the works cited examples. But in that sense, I think that should be a whole separate activity where you might have, hey, read this article, this academic article for homework, and I want you to highlight every time there's a direct quote, every time there's a piece of paraphrased information. And we're gonna look through together and see how it's formatted when it's MLA. Notice how they have the author name here, so it's only the page number in the parentheses. Notice that they had this thing, notice that they had that thing, and so you can have a discussion of in-text examples. And again, when I do my participation activity, the verbal feedback one that I mentioned in this other video, where I give public feedback to my students, okay, submit a paragraph from your paper, a draft, right? And make sure that paragraph has at least 1 citation. So then when I'm giving you feedback, I can say, yes, this is MLA, or no, it's not. It's missing this, or it's missing that, or this is formatted incorrectly. Okay, so that's another participation activity you can have students do to get more points, right? But also to give them a sense of, are you doing the MLA correctly before you turn in this paper? So that's how I approach teaching MLA. I would appreciate you clicking like if you found it helpful, subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future teaching tips, and if you have your own suggestions for teaching MLA, I'd love to hear them in the comment section as well. I'll see you next time.